thank you for your wonderful introduction. This was very kind of you, and I'm happy to be joining you tonight. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you find it interesting. I'm slightly different, probably a different type of your usual speaker here, because I come from a linguistics background. So today I want to tell you a little bit about how can stylistics approach us to analyzing text across different media, and I'll give you examples of texts with two different media. So today I want to cover several things. So first, some introductions to explain to you why I'm talking about stylistics. And then what is it with stylistics that I'm talking about, and how you approach this type of analysis. Then talk a little bit about the texts that I mentioned in my abstract, so you already know which text I'm going to be talking about, and do some short sample analysis, and then draw it together and maybe recommend some reading if you're interested in learning about stylistics or about analyzing language of popular culture. So just to start with, as Justina already mentioned, I'm currently working as a head of international college at University of Lincoln in UK, and this is a unit that supports international students. So actually my job is about teaching students for whom English is not the first language, teaching academic writing and skills. So it's actually not related to theoretical linguistics or literature. I have a PhD in linguistics, stylistics, so I describe myself as a stylistician from Lancaster University, but I am a graduate of your institute. My first degree I did in Wrocław, and that's how I met Justina and other colleagues. And all my dissertations, so my PhD thesis, my MA dissertation, which I also did at Lancaster, and BA dissertation, which I did at Middlesex University, are all in stylistics. So we're drawing on stylistics approach on fiction. So for my BA dissertation, I actually looked at fiction, Chronicles of Narnia, and then the other two dissertations were focused on TV shows. So I've, like Justina mentioned, since very early in my academic career, I've been interested in popular culture because I enjoy consuming popular culture, especially television, but also I'm interested in creativity in language, and that's why I'm looking at this. And the other reason why I'm talking about it today is because I use stylistics and this approach both in my research, so I try to be research active and do different things, and also in teaching, because I teach, like I said, academic writing and academic study skills and what we call EAP, English for Academic Purposes. And I use stylistic approach with this way of looking at texts in both. So a disclaimer here, I'm not here to say I'm the authority on stylistics, far from it. But I just want to share thoughts on how you can use this approach to maybe enhance the way you look at text, or maybe you're already doing it and just give you the names, what it is, or give you an additional tool to look at different texts. What is stylistics? If you haven't heard of it, if you have, sorry for repetition, but I can't assume that this is something you know. I think I've only heard about it when I moved to England, so this was a new word to me. So stylistics can be called a subdiscipline of linguistics that is concerned with the systematic analysis of style in language. And this can vary according to different factors, usually different types of texts. And text could be written text, a novel, a poem, but it could be a song lyric or a TV show or a film. So keyword here is systematic analysis. So you have some kind of framework that you follow looking at elements of language in those texts. But also to do stylistics is to explore language, and more specifically creativity and language use. And this is why I resonate with stylistics, because I'm interested in creative uses of language, basically playing and manipulating language to achieve something. So to explore language in a systematic way, this is what stylistics is for me. Now, there are many definitions and many terms used about stylistics. One of the things that you might most often hear is literal linguistics. So those are interchangeable, either stylistics, and in some schools or universities you would hear literal linguistics. I don't particularly like this term personally, because I believe that stylistics can be applied to any text, not just literary text. And if you say literary linguistics, you think about literature, especially high literature. And I think you can use it for lots of different things. So for me, it's a little bit of not very helpful. That's why I prefer to say stylist, because it's about language and style and not pointing what text. Now, but this is really interesting, and where it's coming from is if you study, and I wonder where you position yourself, whether all of you are just literary scholars from the literary side, or maybe some of you have background in linguistics as well. If you ask linguists, those, for example, might be doing historical linguistics or something that they consider more serious. Literal linguistics would be the softer side of linguistics, and that's why it's called literal linguistics, because it's toward literature. If you ask literary scholars, they would say, oh, you're more serious, you're towards linguistics, that's why you're literally linguistics. And that's why it's like an in-between term, but I don't think it's extremely helpful. Also here a term cognitive stylistics. So this is a type of stylistics, cognitive, to do with how our mind works when the language is manipulated. So either when you decide what you do with language, or when you read as an audience, as a reader, as a receiver of the language. Not all stylistics is cognitive, because some is just focused on text, but a type of this could be cognitive stylistics. You can also hear about corpus stylistics. So if you heard about corpus is a large collection of texts, or corpora is more collections in plural. And corpus linguistics is in the last 15, 20 years a big development in the area of linguistics to allow us to very quantitative work. So you can actually bring together huge amounts of text and then analyze them quantitatively through corpus tools, which could be software that helps you deal with it. So it's not qualitative when you analyze one text, you analyze loads of text. And this is useful for newspapers, for lots of different texts. Now, in stylistics, there is a trend of corpus stylistics, and this is something that is quite big in my place where I did my degree in Lancaster. So you would hear corpus stylistics. But again, this is just one type within stylistics. You might hear about pedagogical stylistics, and this is something that is particularly important to me, because, and it's also recent development, but this is to do with using this approach, looking at language and style, to teach. And you'll be interested in it if you are a literary scholar, because traditionally pedagogical stylistics would be using a text in the target language, whether it's English, French, or Spanish. And you would, instead of teaching the way many of us learn the foreign language traditionally, grammar translational method, where you would grammar, vocabulary, and build sentences in class. This would be analyzing a text, so getting a text in target language and learning a language from this literary text. And that's how it is. That's why it's called pedagogical stylistics. You can extend it. So I'm particularly interested in it, using it to teach academic reading or teach academic writing. For example, write your PhD thesis. And that's how I'm sort of exploring it, because you can extend it. So you can, for reading, you can approach analyzing text, looking at an academic journal article, and then using language and style approach, thinking, okay, do I agree with this? How this author is telling me their stance? Do they give evidence? And how do I feel about what they're saying? Or when you're writing for your own writing, you can look, how do I express my writing? How do I express my stance? You could also hear about eco-stylistics. This is a very new area. So there is eco-linguistics, which is much more developed, but eco-stylistics is beginning there. This is something I've just recently been interested in. I'm actually doing a project with your very own Professor Kuźniak. And this is basically stylistic approach to text with the eco slant. There's lots of things about humans and environment and language and how it's expressed. This is by no means everything. This is just something that you might hear. The one you would probably hear is literary linguistics or stylistics, and then others. Now, you might think, I analyze text and there are other things that I know how to call them. So you might hear discourse analysis or CDA, which is critical discourse analysis. I'm not saying they are the same, but they are related. So they are also textual analysis, textual approaches. The difference is that for discourse analysis is closer to social linguistics, and the focus is on the social context. And very often, especially in CDA, it is about how language is manipulated to achieve something in the social context, like a political manifesto or speech. Whereas in stylistics, we focus on the text. So you obviously you consider the context, but you really focus on the text and not on the social aspects. So CDA is multidisciplinary, also approaches from outside linguistics, whereas stylistics is within linguistics field, just focusing on the text. You might also hear about textual analysis, and they are all related because all of them is looking at text, but this would be more general approach to analyzing text. And for me, particularly, I associate textual analysis with literary analysis. So all of these come from different ones, different sort of approaches, different perspectives, but they are all related. So they're all looking at the text. But for me, the difference for stylistics and textual analysis is stylistics is more looking at language at the word level, and maybe, systematic framework. I look at lexis, grammar, and other things. Whereas textual analysis perhaps might be more free to look at what elements, whether it's metaphors or some literary devices. At least this is my understanding, just to give you the background. So what do stylisticians do? They try to discover not just what a text means, but also how it comes to mean what it does. So it's not just this is the result, but how did we get there? What sort of devices, tools, and elements to manipulate language or to create language were used to achieve this final result, whether it's a beautiful poem or a beautiful novel or maybe a very, very, very successful advert. So stylistics works within linguistics but draws on lots of different fields and subfields within linguistics. So it would draw on phonology and phonetics, for example, graphology, morphology, syntax, grammar, lexical analysis and lexicology, semantics, pragmatics, and any area of linguistics we can draw on. So it's very interesting subfield that it's not separate from others, but actually drawing from lots of different fields to look at language and style. Now, how do you do it? So the traditional manuals would tell you need to ask yourself questions about the texts. And you would ask about foregrounding or deviation or parallelism. So what is different? What is the same? Style variation within text. This is really interesting, and I'm sure you recognize it if you have a text that it's part of it is one style and then it switches style. Sound, meaning, and effect. Rhythm and meter for poetry, discourse structure and speech realism for drama, speech accent, turn taking or conversation analysis, conversation behavior, also drama, speech and thought presentation. This is particularly big and developed within stylistics field. Think about stream of consciousness for Virginia Woolf, thinking about how speech and thought is presented. Politeness and impoliteness, so this is more pragmatics. Assumptions, presuppositions and inferring meaning. So again, pragmatics and lexical and grammatical choices. Now, all those are often given. You need to consider all those it's more useful for literary text. So if you look, I'll give you references at the end, but there's a book analyzing the language of prose, drama, and poetry, or poetry, prose, and drama. And then it gives, by Mick Short, and it gives you literally checklists, ask those questions for each type of text. They are useful for more literary text, but as I said, what I'm trying to convey today is this approach is useful for any type of text you want. So I call it applied stylistics. So here's a sort of simplified way of thinking, okay, what do I ask? What do I look at if I have this text and it's interesting linguistically and I want to just see what's there? So we could look at patterns, repetition, and irregularities. And this is not just word level, because you could find it at, story level, of course, and phrase level and chapter level and so on. But stylistics goes down to the word level. So patterns, repetitions, irregularities, lexical choices, grammatical choices, and implied meaning. So this is the pragmatics, metaphor, idiom, colloquialism, any other literary devices that you can think of. Intertextuality, so referring to other texts or other styles. If it's referring to or invoking a style of another text, we would call it interdiscursivity. Conversational behavior and other effects like sound, spelling, and font. These are really useful when you analyze adverts, for example. And format. And I think these are more useful to think about if to approach any other text, right? Not just literally or high literature. So having introduced you to stylistics, and sorry if you knew all this already, but this was a reminder. This is the approach. So it's language and style and drawing on different ways of looking at texts. Now, today I'm looking at two different texts, and I'll tell you why. So the first one is the Ink trilogy by British author Alice Broadway. And it's Ink, Spark, and Scar from 2017 to 2019. Now, this is difficult to categorize because it's published by Scholastic, which is Scholastic Children Books. But actually, I think it's on the verge between children's and young adult. And because this community is for children's literature, I thought you might find it interesting. They are very beautiful stories, very interesting world building stories. If you're interested in world building and some kind of dystopian realities, and also these are translated into Polish. If you prefer to read in Polish or give it to your child, I know because I gave the Polish version to my nephew. And so the Ink, the main character, is just turning 16, so that's why I think it's on the verge of becoming. The story is quite children's, but I think it's sort of between children's and young adult literature. And this character, she's just turned 16, so she's on the verge of thinking, well, what do I do in the future? She just lost her father, so there's this moment of perspective changing and growing up. But she lives in a world that is different to ours. So in her world, the natural thing to be is to be tattooed. That's why it's called ink. So every single person in the community she lives in is inked, and there are official signs which would be dots for your age, but also your profession, your qualifications from school. If you are a criminal, your crimes. And some other achievements, official achievements, but you would also, after you turn 16, you can start adding symbols that are important to you. So it could be symbols, pictures, words, so it could be name of your children or your lover, or it could be different symbols that mean something to you. So she lives in this world, and the community accepts this is their reality. There is another group that is called the blanks, who don't have tattoos, who refuse to get tattooed, and they've been exiled. So this world has this mythos about why they are tattooed and why they need to do it. This is to do with being able to read people. So they have lots of those important marks. They can be everywhere on the body, but the important marks are on the forearms. So even in winter, they have to dress so they show off the forearms so everyone can read them. So people without tattoos are suspicious because they have secrets. You don't know anything about them because you can't read their skin. So in the first book, Leora, that's the main character. We are introduced to this world, and she explores what she wants to do. She takes an apprenticeship to become an inker or tattooist. Then in the second book, she actually spends some time with the blanks. So she's changing her perspective and learning the other side of the mythos, what they believe and why they believe they shouldn't be tattooing each other. And then in the third book, in Scar, she returns to a community, but she's changed and people are changed. And I'm not going to say more. You can read it, why this whole happens. But it's very interesting world. So I would recommend it. My second text is, you might be more familiar with, Fate, the Winx Saga Netflix, which we had first season last year, and second season I read should come autumn this year, so we have a few months to wait. And this is interestingly based on animated series Winx Club, I think it's called, with fairies with wings, like Tinkerbell, on Nickelodeon, children's channel. So this is also interesting for another project for you, is the adaptation of children's animated series into young adult live action series on Netflix, and what does it mean, for older audience. This is centered around Bloom, who is the girl in front of a poster, and she grew up in our world, but actually she discovers she has powers and she's a fairy, so magical creatures are the fairies, and she starts going to this college for fairies to learn about her magic and control it. And I think it's really interesting because it's this young adult story about growing up, learning about yourself, learning about to control your powers, and it's also beautifully built world. Why I chose those two texts? Because from practical point of view, well, I'm here for children's literature community, so it has to be texts that are relevant to you. So there's a children/young adult trilogy of books, and then you have young adult TV show. I wanted to show you different media, so you have written fiction and a TV show, dialogues in a TV show. And also for me, it's a bit dogmatic because I very strongly believe that we should be looking at popular culture and different texts. This is relevant to people. We all consume those series, and if we talk to people out there who consume the series and you can tell them something interesting about them, this is relevant for other people. So I think, and interesting. So I think we should be looking at those, because why not? Not all people should study Shakespeare or other high literature. So I'm going to give you some examples. Briefly, because I know that we have limited time, from both texts, just to show you how I approach it and what you can notice if you look at the language of the text. So this is from Ink, the first book in the Ink trilogy, the very beginning. So the very first sentence is, I was older than all my friends when I got my first tattoo. This is straightforward. If you expect it's a children's or young adults, so you think, okay, it's a teenager talking about tattoos, maybe they turned 18 and they think, should we get tattoo? It's quite innocent, this sentence. So what happens here, you're creating assumptions in your head, right? Something about a tattoo, you talk about friends, maybe it's a teenager, maybe a young person. So you have a schema, this idea of what this character might be. The next sentence is, my mother loves to tell the story. I wish she wouldn't. So we now learn there is a mother, so it's not an orphan, there is a mother. She loves to tell the story, I wish she wouldn't. And already you see this, there is a grammatical ellipsis, so you don't have a full sentence. I wish she wouldn't tell the story to everyone. I just say, I wish she wouldn't. So it's shortened, it's quite informal, so you have this style. It might also tell you that our character is a teenager, because it's sort of this attitude of it's embarrassing. I wish she didn't tell this story because it's a bit embarrassing. So far, so good. So this gives it informal style, first person narrator, and this assumption of this teenager narrator. However, the next sentence, at 2 days old, you meant to get your birthmark, but I got sick instead and mom canceled the ceremony. Now, at this point, you think, okay, 2 days old, birthmark. You're not sure what it is, but the first sentence was about tattoos. So you're thinking, is it tattoo? And this is getting really strange because I didn't expect an infant of 2 days being tattooed. So at this point, our assumptions are being challenged. Notice there's a birthmark, which is also marked, because normally when we talk about the birthmark, it's something you're born with, right? So it's not something that someone does to you. It's something you're born with. It's innate. So again, there's the deviation there. But let's continue what it says. So mom's friend said you need to get her marked. But she told them she would wait until I was better, I would be named and inked then. She ignored the whispers, warnings, and for 20 days I remained formless and void until one day my mother said, let her be Leora, and I was Leora. The word was punched with minuscule needles into my flesh. Now there's loads of things going on here. The first thing probably you notice is there's words that are action verbs here. Look at those. Inked, unmarked, but we're obviously thinking about marking, and punched. And there's these action verbs, physical doing the mark, inking, which is very physical. And you think, a baby, 20 days old baby, and you're talking about inking, which is very unusual, and is challenging this this idea of what happens to babies. And the other thing you see there is the idea about what happens to babies and what happens to babies when they die unmarked, and you have to have a ceremony. Now, I don't know about you, but if you come from maybe Christian background, you might be thinking about a baptism or some kind of naming ceremony. So on the one hand, you have in your head, okay, this is what happens with babies. And you might think, okay, what happens with babies who don't have a ceremony? And you might have a belief, if they are not baptized, maybe they don't go to heaven. So you might think about this, but here it's very physical. It's about if the babies are not tattooed, what happens with them? And in the stories, they're not remembered. It's not about going to heaven, but they're not remembered. So they're forgotten, right? The other thing that is very striking here is that she says, I remained formless and void. Now, this is very striking because if you think, even if you're thinking about baptism in our terms, you don't think about child being formless and void. So this is very, very strange use of words. So as if this mark would give you form and fill you up, right? It give you identity, this naming. So already you have marked use of verbs, inked, unmarked, punch. We are very physical, and also adjectives like formless and void, which really makes you think, okay, what is she saying here? This is foregrounding that this whole first book is about her identity. Well, the whole trilogy is, what does it mean to be marked? Is it what I am, or maybe I can be something else? Note also that there's a use of mum here. So not mother, previously was mother, my mother, but this is mum. So closer relationship, but it's also spelled with capital letter. Not everyone, and lots of people in English wouldn't spell it with capital letter. So we're very close, and I also respect her, so I write with mum. And the other thing, notice that there's really pointing to how small this baby is, because you have minuscule needles, not just small, minuscule needles and tiny letters. So you have minuscule and tiny, pointing to how small she was when she had it, and the letters grown with her for 16 years. She's now 16. The last thing I wanted to point here is the style. So there's a story. So mum's friend said this, but mum told them this. She ignored this, and so for 20 years I remained, and then I was Leora, and so on. This is a very storytelling. So if you think about fairy tales, this is a storytelling style, and we can ask whether this is what Leora is saying, or it's actually she's reporting what her mom would say when she describes this. So there's a lot to unpack in, a small paragraph here. Just an example, if it jumps at you. So just it continues. This is literally the next sentence. So it's the first page and a half of the book. And I'll let you read this. This is probably will leave you probably more uncomfortable if you haven't looked up those books. So what happens with people who die? They are turned into a book. So basically, their skin is taken off their body, and they are turned into a book. It's not a book just bound in skin. Every part is a page with specific tattoos from the life story. And you open it and you see the story of their life. So it is very, very uncomfortable if you think about it. But look what's happening here. So first of all, you have two more of those very physical marking words. So etched. Do you remember? We had imprinted, we had punched, we had inked, and now we have etched and imprinted, so it's also linked to ink. So the story is etched in your body, moments imprinted. Again, it's all about being very physical. So although we think that you live on, but it's all about physicality and the body. And also notice that it's all about the community. So it's we are not afraid of death. We are surrounded by the dead. So we as a community, I believe what everyone else does, then it's everyone has skin books. Notice the physicality of I can breathe them in, touch them, and read their lives. So it's not I'm thinking about them. I can breathe them in from the skin. But notice the switch to pronoun I, because it's first this is the community beliefs, and then this is what I experience myself, and then the last sentence, this is before the section of the chapter ends. But it was only after my father died that I saw the book of someone I'd really known, and this sets up what happens next. So there's a lot of things going on in this. So my last example from ink is further down in the book. It's page 68, so it's sort of less than halfway through. And this is a dream. So there's quite a lot of dreams that she has because she's transforming and she's quite anxious. So she has those dreams. So the top one is a dream. And you can see that she's lying in a bed, in hospital bed in her dream, and she sees the needle in her arm, and something is a dark liquid is being taken. She thinks it's blood, but then she sees that her tattoos are slowly unraveling, each mark, each word being unwritten. And it's not my blood they're taking, but my ink. I look down at my skin, I'm naked, I'm lost. This is very interesting. There's a lot of verbs about looking, so I'm observing it because it's a dream. So I look down, I watch, and my tattoos are unraveling. And again, it's linking to the tattoos is my identity, because without them, I have this bare skin, I'm naked and I'm lost. So she doesn't like it and she rips the needle from her arm. Now, remember what she said when she wasn't inked at 20 days of when she was an infant. She said, I was formless, I was void. And now I'm naked and I'm lost. So it's linked. No tattoos, no identity. I'm formless. I'm void. I don't know what it means. Like, it's not me. And then she wakes up, and the bottom one is when she wakes up and she talks about my skin tells the tale the government has chosen for me. So on one hand is those official marks that I have to have because everyone in our community has. But then I have a sudden yearning to feel every inch or so that nothing is lost, so all the important things. So this shows overall I don't have a choice that we do it, I have a choice what I put on my skin. And this is also linked to the fact that she's 16, so only after you turn 16 you can actually decide those special symbols that you have. So as you can see from those texts, before I give you an example from the other text, is there are very physical descriptions. There's a lot of action verbs or participles talking about inking or etching or imprinting something. So physically doing something to the skin, evoking tattooing. And there's this mixed schema because on one hand you have some expectations about teenager, about babies, about naming ceremonies or baptisms, but on the other it's actually all about tattoos and about physicality. So there is this fight of that spiritual, because naming and baptism for us might mean something spiritual, for them is very physical because you need to get the ink. And that's why it's so striking, because the world that Alice Broadway builds is so different for us, and it makes you uncomfortable. So the second text is the Winx Saga, and this is the first scene that we see Bloom. So we have the main character Bloom, and she meets this boy called Sky. This is when she arrives in the school that she's going to go, called Althea, and she meets Sky in the courtyard. She doesn't know where she's going. There's lots of students going with luggage, but she doesn't know what she's going. So Sky is year 2 in the second year, so he knows the school, and he notices her. She has striking red hair. He likes her. He goes to talk to her. And you can see, I'm not going to read all of this, but you can see what's happening here. So he comes in and says a lot. So he's babbling because he likes her. If you see, I'm impressed with your confidence in the face of complete ignorance. There's no really meaning there, right? It's just saying for the sake of it. Saying, so he wants to impress her with lots of words, but actually there's not a lot there. And then he sort of sounds like he wants to help, and because he starts the conversation, if you think from conversational analysis point of view, and if you're interested, go look it up, because conversation analysis is really useful for dialogues, is whoever starts the conversation has the power, because they initiate, right? They choose a topic, they initiate and wait for the other person to join the conversation. And so she reasserts herself. She said, I don't need help, thanks, right? So she sort of cuts it off and takes initiative and power from Sky, but he continues because he's a little bit condescending. I don't remember offering, so presumptuous. So he's a bit condescending, but remember, they are two teenagers, they are very flirtatious. So she's smiling. It's not very mean here. Then they have a chat about her being a fairy, and sort of she's sharing information about what she is. And so they fall into, I offer information, he comments, it's an odd thing, she offers more information, we don't have those schools. And then he asks, where are you from? And she says, from California. So it turns out she's from Otherworld. So in this saga, in this show, there's this whole Otherworld with several realms parallel to our world. So most of the students in the school, they all lived in Otherworld, and she comes from outside. And then they continue talking. So she's flirting again when she says, flirting also, if you want your mind blown, 3 months ago, I didn't know about this. And he said, well, if you are lost, which I'm not saying you are, and if you need help, which I'm not saying I'm offering. And again, he's bubbling. So on the one hand, he wants to show off, but on the other hand, he's sort of, this is completely redundant. So if you think, I don't know if you've ever heard about Grice's cooperative principle in pragmatics, but this basically says, if you ask the question of you want to give information, you just have to give enough. Not too much, not too little, enough. And he's breaking this in communication, because we don't need all this. This is redundant. He just says, well, if you want help, this is where you need to go. But he's not saying that. And she's playing into this. So again, she's taking control again, because she's saying, oh, the specialist hall, obviously. This is sarcastic, because she has no idea what he's saying. And again, he nods, because he doesn't record that she's being sarcastic. So she says, and I definitely know what a specialist is. Again, she has no idea. And he said, oh, sorry. But then she doesn't want him to be in control and, treat her that she doesn't know. So she interjects, and he says, I'd be happy to help or do something. And she says, mansplain it? I says, no, sure, kind of seem like your thing. So she implying. Again, there's a lot here happening that not what is said, but what is implied. This is typical pragmatics and the power relation between the two characters. I think what is really interesting here, we can see there's two young people and they are flirting a bit, but it's also showing that this is probably quite realistic of how young people might talk, especially when she's using very current word mansplain. So the audience would know what this means. And this is a second example from this. I have two from this text. This is when she meets her new roommate, Aisha, and just before that, she was talking to her parents on the phone, and her parents don't know where she is, so they think she's in Switzerland. So she was like, "Oh, this is Aisha. It's strange you have human parents, but you are fairy." So she wants some explanation. Bloom explains, but look at the right-hand side, because this is the part that really interests me, is when Bloom says, oh, I can't get used to this ridiculous thing that I'm in a magical school. And Aisha says, oh my God, are you the only person in the universe who's never read Harry Potter? Now, this is quite funny. And obviously, if you get a Harry Potter reference and you read Harry Potter, you know what she means. This is quite overt reference, because she could have said, you never heard of Hogwarts. So this is a little bit more in-depth reference. But also she is making an assumption that whoever read Harry Potter would love to be in a magical school, which probably is not true, but yeah. And then there's a whole discussion about Harry Potter. So Bloom says, if you knew how many hours I have wasted taking sorting hard quizzes, and all the others, if you read Harry Potter, you know exactly what they're talking about. If you haven't, you don't really know, especially when she talks about sorting hat. But most people reading those books will know. Notice how here there is a banter, so they are very playful. When she says, oh, Ravenclaw and sometimes Slytherin, and Aisha sort of counters, oh, that explains the lies, implying Slytherin students are liars. And then Bloom says, let me guess, Gryffindor explains the judgment to counter this, and walks off, implying that Gryffindor students are so good that they are very judgmental. But what you see here, especially in terms of grammar, is you see this is a normal conversation with very elliptic in grammar. So there's no full sentences. It's when Aisha says Ravenclaw, she doesn't say, "Oh, let me guess, you were sorted into Ravenclaw." just Ravenclaw. And we know what it means. So ellipsis is working because we don't need the full sentence to get the whole meaning. There's a lot of conversations like this between Bloom and other students. There's great scenes between her and the headmistress of the school. And I think this gives you just a very, very small flavor on what you can actually do when you look at dialogues on the television. So when she talks to Sky, there is some flirting. He's a little bit babbling because he likes her, a little bit condescending. She is sort of trying to reassert her, especially when she says you're mansplaining. When she talks to Aisha in this scene, she is playful. There's this banter between two teenagers. So when she's talking to Sky, the power relation is not even because Sky knows more, is older, is a guy. So she tries to reassert it so that they can be on the same level. When she talks to Aisha, they are roommates. They are all both first years. They are on the same level. They're more playful there. But what happens here, and I think, judging from what I see from the text and from what I've seen in the show, is they successfully imitate how I think younger people would speak. Have a conversation, have a banter, being sarcastic, being flirtatious. And you can see it in those exchanges and, in a grammar and words that they choose. So just to bring it all together, I think on this very small sample, I tried to show you that stylistics can be applied to a variety of texts, to be either fiction, but it could be, television show, which I've done a lot. It could be a lyric from a song. It could be an advert. It could be a little note somewhere. Could be anything. There's a lot to be analysed out there. Being systematic helps. So what we want to do if we use this approach is consider all the mark elements. So if we're looking, we look at word. If let's say we look at dialogue, like here, we look at word choice and grammatical things, what is said, but also who starts the conversation, who says more, who seems to have more power, and how it's played out, let's say. So it helps if you think, there are all those elements there, and I need to consider them all to have an idea what's happening. Stylistics approach can give you evidence to justify studying popular culture text because it gives you evidence on the word level. So this is something I used in my PhD because, as Justina mentioned at the beginning, my PhD was in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And one of the comments throughout my PhD was, how can you apply conversation analysis to a text like this? Conversation analysis traditionally would be applied to everyday real life speech, not fictional. So one of the arguments I found for that, and it helped me in my PhD, is that is very similar to natural speech. So one of the things is not similar is, for example, there's no overlap when you watch TV or films because actors just wait till one says something and then another says something. But in real life, we don't notice it. So when we watch, we actually see it as a normal dialogue because we don't notice overlap in real life. If you do a stylistic analysis, then you have evidence. There's enough similarity to real life talk that is based, in conversation analysis research, that you can do that. And this is a good argument. And also it offers you, and I don't know those of you who have joined us here what your background is, but if at least some of you are studying English philology, what I did, which is both literature and linguistics, you have both elements there. This is actually a great opportunity to engage both of those expertise. And you don't have to be expert in both, but from both sides, and it actually merges and gives you a nice lens to look at texts. So if you'd like to read more about stylistics, here are some really useful texts, and I'm happy to share those slides if you'd like to. I would recommend especially short and Legion short. There are seminal texts, manuals, step by step with checklists. This is what you need to do. The other ones explain more what stylistics are, contemporary different approaches. So all of them are really, really useful. An example what you can do is what I've published, but this is just to show you what texts could be looked at. And it could be looked at together with the literary text you're looking at. So the bottom two are from my PhD about Buffy. So these are chapters, and then the middle one, 2015, is on a series of paranormal romance books. It's a series and about narration, so it's very narratology focused. And then the top ones, actually, top two is something recently I've been doing is the language of Marvel Cinematic Universe. So the top one is actually in the works and will probably come out next year. But just to show you that if you're interested in this, there's no limit to what text you're looking at, and people are interested in looking at analysis of such text. If you would like to look at people who are really experts in language and popular fiction or language of popular culture, I would suggest those readings. So there's Monica Belnarek from University of Sydney. She wrote a lot about language of fictional television, and she also created a television dialogue corpus that you can use. And then there's others like Susan Mandela, based in UK, and others talking the Montoro Rocio. She wrote about chick lit, so popular fiction for women, and there's others about television. So this brings me to the end. Thank you for listening, and feel free to connect with me. And now you know why my Twitter handle is Vampire Linguist. And feel free to email me or connect with me on LinkedIn. Thank you. And I'll stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Gosia. I can hear some echo. I don't know what's going on. Okay. Thank you so much for introducing us to all these nuances of stylistics and the variety of approaches within it, and also to the terminology, and to these two readings of two different texts, two different formats. Now we have time for questions. So just to remind you, you can ask them in our comments, of course. You can ask them in the chat, or if you also directly, if you raise your hand. So we have time for that. At the moment, I can't see any questions in the chat. Okay, if I may have a question, or it's to kind of start to kick us off, let's say. I was wondering, especially in relation to TV series, and I was thinking, well, not really about let's say YA or children's series, but about Big Bang Theory, to be honest, one of my favorites. I'm wondering how much of stylistics do the creators of these dialogues actually know, because it seems that just looking at the quality of the dialogues, how it engages you, how funny it is, that they seem to know quite a lot. And I'm kind of, do you know anything about this? I mean, is this knowledge also something that, people working in the field with
it is really difficult to ascertain, and obviously it's the same thing as when we analyze a poem and we think what the poet wanted to say. It's difficult, right? Because you can't really say unless you ask them. So for TV series, it's the same. Some of them say openly that they write in a certain style. So, for example, for Buffy, it was quite easy because they actually openly said that they write the way Joss Whedon speaks, and he had a whole, we call them a stable of writers who actually knew this is how he speaks, and we're emulating his style, what he likes, and they all wrote the same way. Some writers, like Jane Espenson, known from Buffy, and she now does lots of other series, she actually has a degree in linguistics. So this really helps, but it's difficult to ascertain. I think they are aware of it, and when they learn screenwriting, if they had degrees in this, they think about it, how to play the dialogues, and they emulate a style that they might like. They might not consciously think, if I do this, people would love it, or this is what will happen. It might be subconscious, but yeah, it's not 100% possible to ascertain, but definitely there is some kind of intention.
Okay, I'm checking the chat because I have another question. Oh, yes, there's a question from Karenza. Yes, please. Hello, Karenza. Good to see you.
Hello, thank you. That was really interesting. Sorry, I couldn't find the chat, so I think I would just ask the question.
Of course.
Thank you. So I'm also a Buffy fan. I haven't researched it, but I've enjoyed watching it. And I'm just thinking about the episode called Hush, where the actual language is taken away from the characters for a while. And they find different ways to communicate, so very visual ways. And it's got me thinking about the visual aspect of stylistics because, for instance, if you're reading a novel, you might have some words that are in italics, or if you're reading poetry, they might play around with the typography. And I wondered if you'd had any experience of this alternative visual modes of communication, like removing the voice and visual modes, if you've had the chance to look at that in terms of stylistics as well.
That's a really great question. Thank you, Karenza. It depends how you understand stylistics, because if you think, oh, this is just a linguistic way of text, in what I've done so far, I've always looked predominantly at text. But yes, if you're analyzing a TV show, and normally, you know, what I did today, I didn't have a lot of time, but normally you would analyze all the other elements as well, because they are really important. So you would employ some kind of additional framework from visual analysis, and you would think, what do I look at? And again, this would be similar approach if it's, you know, I used to teach language of advertising. So if you have a static poster, it's slightly different. It's like an image and analyzing images. Or if you have a TV show, there's movement and there's music and there's other things. So definitely, if you were doing something like this with a scene, you would definitely employ extra elements into your toolbox. So not just, you know, grammar lexis this, but also music and where the actor's standing. And I tried to tell you, you know, with bloom and sky, what they were actually physically doing. So yeah, so you definitely have to do it. If you don't do it, then you are accused of you just looking at language. It's a TV show and there's all those elements. So you employ extra things. With Buffy, I haven't done a lot of this because I focus on language, but I analyzed those two vampires, Spike and Angel, and I looked at the scenes with all those elements. So it's an extra visual elements that you need to include. But in any analysis like this, I would say you just say how much you include, because you cannot do everything, right? You're not a musicologist, for example, with a music or costume specialist. So you just have to say, okay, I'm just looking at those elements that are pertinent to the scene.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, yes, and we have another question. Madeline, please.
Hello, everyone. I don't know if you can see me, but I hope you can see me.
Yes.
Thank you so much for a very interesting lecture. I had a question, and that relates to a possible combination between a stylistic approach, a stylistics approach, and a narratological approach. Because where I come from, I'm a staff member of a comparative literature department. These are things that we combine in our textual analysis. For instance, when you talk about different linguistic registers, that's very interesting, but that could also be linked to questions concerning point of view. And also to power relations in a text between those who get to focalize, to present their point of view, and those who are only focalized, who are mere objects of focalization. And so when it comes to a critical approach to looking at power relations in a text, I imagine that such a link could also be very fruitful. So could you please comment on that?
Yeah, definitely. This is a fantastic point. Thank you, Madeleine. It's definitely something that you can use and we should be using. So it's just a case of, I guess, when you approach a text, this is how I was taught stylistics and how I do it. You just decide what things you put in your toolbox, right? Whether you use narratology or not, because narratology is more from literary side, would definitely help. So, you know, whether power relations are from point of views in narration or whether it's in conversation behavior, then you can look at it differently. So I guess at one point you think, what is actually most useful for me? What's the best framework for me? Or I build my own framework. It would be really useful. I used a bit of this in this paper I wrote about a narration in Otherword series by Yasmin Gale-Norn, because this is a series about three sisters, and each book is narrated by a different sister. So I looked at, one is a vampire, one is a witch, one is a cat, and how it's narrated. And I looked more on the language level, verbs and things like that, but it's definitely very fruitful. So I guess what I'm arguing here is this is one of the options. And if what you're doing is narratology, this is something that you can just attach to your own toolbox. But we just have to decide how we're approaching and what's the best help for what we want to do. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And also thinking about what Madeleine said, coming from comparative literature, of course, cultural issues, right? And then there would be still, stylistics being also defined, I guess, or particular, or even, I don't know, conversational behaviors, right, being defined by particular culture.
Yes.
So that would also come into, I guess.
Yeah, I guess it's
the discussion. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think what happens is all those elements come up when, depending on your text. So this is,
of course,
in my first quote, were different factors, right? So if there's this social element really important, definitely you need to consider it. I just gave you very small examples from those two texts, but this is what I found, in my PhD when I looked at Spike, for example, and when he's, Human is this babbling British poet and British accent. So I looked at, but he says British accent, and Angel has fake Irish accent, but also looked at cultural elements there in terms of lexis, because Spike, for example, when he wants to be a poet, he uses lots of Latinate words to be more flowery. When he becomes a vampire, he uses lots of Germanic words and associated with lower social class and sort of like Cockney English. Which is also very interesting. So I think it all depends on the text, but it's definitely there. So what I'm saying, look at your text and then think, okay, what I need to draw out of it, and then what tools I need to employ to actually draw it out in a systematic way that I can argue does something.
And I think especially for, let's say, analysis of texts for young readers, because what you focused on were, let's say, especially the dialogue, right? It was between peers. Then in the book, the Ink trilogy, there was more about this, I think, child-adult power differentials. But especially, I think, looking at dialogues between children or young people and adults, right? It would be interesting also to see how power kind of plays out for example, through, once again, behaviors or maybe choice of words or...
Yeah, definitely. And there was a scene from the Winx Saga that I wanted to include, but I just didn't have space. I think I went over time anyway, but there was one where she talks to the headmistress who recruited her to the school. And it's really interesting because she said, I thought I would sell wings and I want to practice my magic. And the headmistress says, what you need to learn is control, because she's a fire fairy, so she can really do her damage. But the headmistress finishes the conversation, you came here because you didn't have a choice. And it's a very, very powerful move. It's like end of conversation. So yes, there's a lot of going on there. So that's why conversation analysis would be really useful for children's literature if you're looking at something like that. Because what I found, that it doesn't matter how many words or how much you speak, the person who doesn't speak much can be in the powerful position. So you're just looking at what's going on out there. But yeah, it would be a useful tool.
Okay. Do we have any more comments? Can't see the chat. Karenza has a question, please.
Thank you very much. So I was wondering also about the language of animals in novels. I understand that your research field is fantasy in particular, so I don't know if you've had the chance to look at this, but I was thinking of a book called Wolf Brother by Michelle Paver. It's a series And in this series, a lot of the book follows the adventures of a boy, but some of the chapters or the elements are written from the perspective of a wolf. And this wolf is given to use language like for fire, he calls it the bright beast that bites hot, for instance. And some of the language is very repetitive. So everything is bad, bad, bad when it's the animal character speaking. And I'm quite interested in that. And I wondered if you've looked at animals from a stylistics perspective at all, an animal language, or if you know of anybody else that has.
That's also a good question. Thanks, Karenza. I don't know on the top of my head, but I can find out if you'd like, because I don't know on the top of my head someone else. I didn't have much chance to look at it. In the chapter I mentioned about those three sisters, there's a little bit about it, because the one that is, she's a werecat, so she's human, but she turns into tabby cat. Sometimes she turns into a puma, and there's lots of cats there. But they are more very anthropomorphized, personified, that they behave like humans, or they just, they wouldn't speak physically, but you have their thoughts like as humans, right? So I think that would be really interesting. Is it a real animal, or is it someone turning into animal? But while you were explaining it, I need to read this book because it sounds really good. I was thinking about a book. I don't know if anyone heard of it, because I did it in a module about animals in literature, and it's called Eva, I think, by Peter Mitchell. Yeah. And then I was just thinking, if we wanted to explore this, that would be a brilliant idea, when the main character is sort of becoming more and more chimpanzee, and whether she's losing language or creating a new language. But I haven't looked at it myself, so I think it's a really interesting something to do. So Karenza, there's a project there. Look at those type of things.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions, comments? If I may just have maybe a final question or comment. I was thinking right at the beginning, when you started to analyze those excerpts from Ink, and how, like, the very first sentence in a way builds this kind of schema in the reader's mind. But I was also wondering about what kind of, let's say, expectations readers come with, right, when they start reading such a book, probably knowing that it's a dystopian story. I mean, maybe it has been recommended by someone else, or they read a blurb or something like that. So there is, I think, also a kind of interaction going on between what we get in the story, the particular elements, the particular words, and what these words kind of trigger in our minds. Also, of course, about expectations for the development of the narrative and so on. But also, I think what we come with matters. Yeah. I don't know if you have any observations maybe on this as well, on this kind of play between.
Yeah, I think it's true, and yeah, it's probably difficult now to come completely as a blank page, right? Because you bought it because maybe you looked at the cover or someone told you. The covers are most beautiful in the picture.
Yes,
but they are very sparkly and tactile. They don't have a blurb at the end, but it says the truth will get under your skin at the back. So there's no bigger blurb.
So that's actually a very clever blurb.
Yes,
intriguing, but not telling you too much.
Yes, and I think of what there is inside, it says, imagine a world where your every action, every deed is marked on your skin for all to see. So obviously, this is what you can do. I think you would expect this, but things like your dad dies and they make a book out of his skin probably is not what you expected. And it, for me, an adult reader, was quite shocking. And there's a whole profession of I think they call them flayers, who get the skin out and prepare the skin for the book. So it's really, but I think you are right. This is this interplay between how much do you expect and whether this fulfills these expectations or not. But probably there will be elements, especially in a story like this, that would really shock you anyway, even if you know what to expect, especially if you're a young reader. So, and the myth is there's this character called the Saint, who is the Saint, but they just call him Saint, not Saint Peter, whatever, it's the Saint. And there's this whole story when he goes to the other world and he's being flayed alive, and he comes back with his skin on his arm, and it's just very gruesome. So I think there is interplay, but I don't think it negates what you find when you look at language and style, because there's still those elements. Even if you knew what to expect, I think this is a very powerful beginning.
Yeah, it is definitely. And also, even when you come, at least when you think about, let's say, the convention of dystopia, of course, you expect that things will get bad, are bad, right? In this fantastic world. So this, in a way, confirms your kind of expectations, and you're looking for more, I guess. Maybe even maybe I'm reading. I don't think it happens very consciously, but. I guess you would be looking for some kind of signs, right, of the dystopian reality.
Yeah, and maybe this is where, analyzing language and style comes in, because you're looking for them. So you need to have them, you need to reinforce this message. They know what to expect, but you need to reinforce it and keep it, maintain it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Do we have any other comments, questions? Okay, I can't see any, so I think we'll be closing. Once again, big thanks, Gosia, for introducing us to this approach, and to probably we do it all the time, thinking about texts, but we just don't. Or at least, well, I'm speaking for myself, right? I do not really think in such terms, but definitely I will from now on at least try to, at the back of my mind, to try to think along these categories. So many thanks once again for that. I think you will work like this for some of us at least. And as we said at the beginning, the stock has been recorded, so we will make it available soon. But of course, we'll let you know when it's out there. And if you are interested, of course, you can return to it. If you're interested in contacting Gosia, I'm sure you can look her up, or if you can't find the information, we'll gladly share it with you. And this is our last talk before the summer. We'll for sure return. We are returning, definitely, in October, but we'll be sending out, of course, the information, the details for the further talks. So once again, thank you very much. Some of the guests, of the participants today, they have been joining us quite regularly. So big thank you to I'm very, very grateful. We appreciate your following this series. And for those who are here for the first time, of course, we invite you to join us again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.